Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Smart Divorce podcast. I'm so happy to be joined by the incredibly colourful and fabulous Sara Maxwell. So to introduce Sara to you, she works with people, supporting them to find joy in connecting to their money, which I love, injecting some colour, energies and joy into what can sometimes feel like the grey clouds of money. And you'll see from Sara's lovely talk if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're not, go and have a look on YouTube. And her bright coloured heart in the background. She is one of the brightest people that I know. If you have a look at her Instagram page, it will absolutely make you smile every day. Sara is a financial coaching trainer, twice certified and ICF PCC accredited. She has over 20 years experience in financial services, where she picked up her financial advice qualifications. She founded The Wealth Coach and co-founded Couples Talk Money with friend of the podcast, Kim Crew. Sara, welcome. I'm so happy to have you talking to us today.
Oh, thank you. What a beautiful introduction. I think I might cry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here as well. And I've been listening to the podcast and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the no nonsense way people talk about money and other really important things. And I think it's really, really helpful. So I'm so pleased that you invited me to be on here. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about couples talking about money. And this is something that I know is really close to both of our hearts. So just as a bit of background and a bit of introduction as to why I thought it was important to talk to you today, was that the majority of clients that I work with in my work as a divorce specialist financial planner, the majority of my clients haven't been the money person in the relationship. And when I say that, what I mean is that the majority of relationships, you split the jobs according to whatever happens to be the thing that you're best at. So in my marriage, my husband, I've said this many times before, my husband used to do the gardening and I used to clean the house. I flipping hate gardening unless it's growing something that I can eat at the end. And I realise that sounds a bit bonkers, but that's just me. So when we split up, one of the first things I did was get a gardener to come and do the gardening. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with splitting up the jobs according to who does what best. But when it comes to money, it's slightly different in that both of you need to know where you stand. I'm right in thinking that you're on board with that view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much that couples don't know about each other when it comes to money. I've even worked with couples that have been together 20, 25 years and still in our sessions, they're finding out really important things about each other's views about money, about each other's relationship about money, about, how their sort of parents or caregivers interacted with them and kind of why that's caused some of the idiosyncrasies that they may have now. So it's just kind of that almost that information gathering as to what has happened to that person in front of you to kind of bring them to the person that they are today, and being able to kind of have some form of understanding of that.
Absolutely. Money is so difficult to talk about, isn't it, in the UK? And I can't talk for what it's like in other cultures and other countries, but certainly in the UK, we're so bad at talking about money. I know groups of friends who'd rather sit and tell me graphic details of their sex life rather than tell me what they earn or what's in their bank account. And we really need to smash through that so that we can get people talking about money, because you're only going to learn about it if you talk about it with your friends, and it's only going to start seeming normal and natural if we start talking about it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's getting comfortable with starting to talk about it. So we might not go straight in with, oh, this is how much I earn and these are the benefits that I receive at work, but we might go in with, oh, when I think about money, I feel quite stressed. Just going in on something that you feel comfortable with trusted friends, I think, at first, because you don't want to put yourself off by telling somebody that's then going to kind of take the mick and share what you've said and kind of put you off talking about it. But it's so powerful to be able to say the things that are on your mind to somebody who's then not going to judge you and not going to react in the way that you're nervous about them reacting. You know, I've had situations where people have told me what they deem to be the worst possible secret, and they've been holding it as real shame, you know, something awful
Oh,
that happened to them in the past, perhaps around debt or something like that. And when I then don't react and I say, okay, that's, you know, there's nothing to feel any shame about, the relief that kind of seems to happen to that person is quite unbelievable. It's almost like they suddenly sit taller in the chair, you know, there's suddenly
yeah.
this weight is lifted because they've said this thing that they've been really holding on to, and nothing bad happened. You know, the world didn't fall apart. It was okay to say it out loud. And I think the more we get comfortable and get used to being able to say those things, the less kind of shame that we will hold around it, and the less judgment we'll hold of others if we all start to share a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I guess what we're talking about is people who are coming and perhaps come out of a relationship, they've been through divorce, they're looking at getting involved in a new relationship, but money wasn't the thing that they looked after in their previous relationship. They might have started to understand a little bit more about money from perhaps working with somebody like me through their divorce, but then they enter a new relationship. So, presumably, on the first date, you're not going to share your financial world with somebody. So, where do you start to begin to open up with a new partner about money?
Do you know, it's interesting you say that on the first date, because I think there are things that you can talk about on the first date that relate to money that allow you to open up about it as a subject. So you're right, you know, you're probably not going to want to share all of your information, but you might want to have the conversation before you even go out on the date of, you know, what are our thoughts on bill splitting? What are, you know, you might want to kind of drop that type of thing into the conversation so that you're kind of starting to talk about money before even the date. You know, slip in little bits of information about just small things relating to money, how you feel about it, what's going on for you at the moment. It doesn't necessarily have to be sharing reams and reams of information, but I think you can go in and start to have little snippets of the conversation. So I guess on the first date, probably the only thing that you're concerned about is kind of, where are you going? Is it affordable? You know, things like that, and not having those expectations that one person will pay or one person won't. Or if you do have that expectation, perhaps sharing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Do you know
think,
what? That's really interesting that you should say that, because I don't think even that, I don't think we have the conversation before we're there. I remember a friend of mine who'd been through a divorce going on a date and saying that the person that she was on a date with had kind of gone, all right, so it's X amount each. And she was a bit like, what? Because she kind of thought, I don't know, she kind of thought he would pay. And she was a
yeah,
bit sort of felt like knocked over by it. But I suppose it's quite an old fashioned expectation that you expect the other person to pay, isn't it? But
yeah.
yeah, she was a bit shocked when it was like, oh no, let's split the bill. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Or you've
yeah,
got that idea of when you go on a date and, you know, somebody orders all the really expensive wine and everything, and you've not had the discussion about, well, are we going to split this? Or because you're ordering all of this expensive stuff, are you thinking that you're going to pay for it? And I think it's moments like that where having those conversations will really make a difference, like throughout your relationship. So almost being able to voice what's going on
yeah,
in your head, I think, can make it easier down the line, because what you don't say in those first few dates, you then almost hold on to as, oh God, does this mean I'm tight? Or you lay all these labels on yourself instead of just saying out loud what's going on in your head, or, you know, dropping a text afterwards, or, you know, whatever it looks like. But I think trying to drop these types of things into conversations early doors, and maybe asking questions like, you know, oh, what was it like in your home life. You know, asking questions like that will naturally kind of pull out people's experiences and how they've lived before now. And I think you're always kind of picking up snippets, aren't you, of little bits of information. And don't be afraid to, I think you can say, if I ask you a question and you feel uncomfortable about it, then you can absolutely tell me that you feel uncomfortable about it, and we can not talk about it. So I think as long as you open up in that way, so I'm going to ask you a question which people don't normally ask each other, but if that's too much for you, just tell me. I tend to be quite open and honest, therefore just let me know if that's too much for you
Yeah.
in any
And you'd
way.
say
So
that about other things, wouldn't you?
yeah,
You would say, if I don't know, if you were asking about somebody's family background or previous dating history or whatever, you'd be like, if you don't want to talk about it, it's not a problem. And yet,
yeah,
that's what you think.
yeah.
Everyone just kind of goes, oh, what?
Yeah, you sort of say the question and you're like, sort of stalling and waiting for, I don't know what to happen, your chair to fall through the floor or something like that. It's like, it's just such and then I think that then adds a layer, doesn't it, to the question of the other person going, God, you look so uncomfortable asking that question that it's almost making me not want to answer.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you don't necessarily work with people on date one. I guess
No, I've
you're
never had anyone on date one. That would be interesting. We're about to go on a first
it.
date. Can we come and work with you?
Pretty fascinating though, eh? Anyway, if anyone's going to go on a first date and they'd like to go work with Sarah, please do let us know before we go, because I'm really interested in that. So tell me about you've got obviously couples talk money with Kim, lovely Kim. Tell us a little bit more about how that works and how that can help couples to start to be a bit more open about their finances and their relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I tell you about couples talk money, I was just going to say, because you asked a question before which related to kind of somebody going into a new relationship and perhaps
Oh,
taking some of the baggage from the old relationship. And it could be that even before you come and do work together as a couple, that actually you do a bit of work on your own. So almost getting yourself
oh,
to a point where you understand your own relationship to money, you kind of understand where you're at practically with money, you have an understanding of what you might want for the future, just yourself,
yeah.
and then come together and do the work as a couple. Because
Mm,
I think in those very early days, understanding as much as possible about yourself and how you might have changed from that separation and going into this new relationship, and what you might be carrying through that you don't really want to carry through. And I think that's
mm,
quite important, because you don't want to bring all that baggage and just sort of hand it to the new person. You want to try to work through that baggage and make it a bit lighter before walking into this new relationship. So just wanted to say that, because you kind of mentioned about a couple coming together after after a divorce or after a separation.
No, it's good advice that, because um money impacts so many parts of our lives. Because I think that we have this view of money and we see uh, when we talk about money, all I see in my head is like treasure chest, like big stacks of gold coins, people counting. Do you know what I mean? Like quite it's quite an old fashioned view, I guess. But it's sort of the nursery rhyme type view of money. And that money is a tool at the end of the day, but because it's the tool that helps you to do other things, actually your view of it and your previous experiences with it and your baggage, as you called it, around money, really can impact all sorts of other parts of your relationship. So it is massively important to deal with it initially. So I think that's fantastic advice. Brill. So tell us a little bit about, once you are in a relationship, got past the first date, we've got past the going Dutch on the first meal. Then what do we do? Then where do we go?
So I think that it's opening up, it's starting to communicate, it's starting to kind of ask the questions. And something that we um, do on the course is we have a welcome session, and in that welcome session we're basically guiding people to start to have communication with each other about forming an agreement between themselves about things like when is best for them to speak about money, how they like to be asked questions, like what would potentially trigger them. So it's almost having that pre-conversation of creating that agreement of, how would I tell if something that I ask you upsets you, or would you please be honest with me if the way that I ask you something triggers you, or kind of all those types of questions, because almost before you even go in and start asking the practical questions or the questions around relationship to money, it's great to put that in place of like, why are we actually doing this? So almost you're creating this empowering statement of, the reason that we're doing this work together and finding out more about each other's money and relationship to money is because we want to build this fantastic life together, or is because we've both decided that someday we'd like to go and retire in Ibiza, or whatever the kind of vision is for, that's what I want to do. Yeah, that's one of mine. But I think
Right.
it's kind of that, it's that pre-conversation, it's that lovely conversation that helps you to understand how to communicate really well with your partner. So what they like and what they don't like. So when they want to be given space, how much time they'd like to think about a question, because there'll be some people who are asked a question and they can come up with the answer immediately. It just springs to mind and they're happy to say it. There'll be other people where, when asked a question, they want to think about it for 24 hours. It's a big question, and they want to really consider their response. They don't want to give an immediate response, and things like that. It's just so helpful to understand that, because if one person wants to know more about what they're going to talk about when they sit and have this couple's date, it would be great if the other person could almost provide a list of questions that they'd like to know the answer to, so that they are able to prepare beforehand. So it's kind of almost learning each other's styles before you even go in and have the communication, because what you're doing then is you're kind of setting up for a way more positive discussion.
Yeah.
And then maybe agreeing to, okay, parts of this conversation might feel difficult because we're talking about things that we've never talked about before. So we're going to give ourselves a treat of something at the end of it. So we're going to go to the cinema in the evening once we've had this conversation, So really building up what would amazing look like for this initial conversation. So I think starting really small, starting that way, so starting with something that feels easy would be kind of my advice as a first step. And that's the way we like to do things with our couples, and that's the way I like to work when I'm working one-to-one with a couple. So you're kind of easing in gently, rather than going in and saying, so what's the total sum value of all your debt, and have you missed any payments? And somebody would immediately go, oh my god, I'm holding all this shame about debt, I can't tell you. And then you start to think, god, do I need to lie because they're asking me such a big question? So yeah, my kind of initial advice would be, let's go in as soft as possible and talk about how we want to communicate with each other and put some agreements around that first. I think that's always a really great step.
I love that, but I have some questions. Apart from, can I come and visit you in Ibiza when you retire out there?
Absolutely, of course.
Yeah, what would trigger me if you asked me questions in a certain way? And I don't know how long it would take me to think about the answer to a question, because I think it would depend how difficult the question was. And sometimes, so in my work as a financial planner, I know that I can't personally ask myself the questions that I would ask of my clients, because I'm not going to push myself to answer them. I'm not going to dig deeper and try and get to the crux of the actual question and the actual answer. So I think, so how how do you know? How are you going to know what's going to trigger you? How do you have a style, a technique that these couples who are speaking to each other about what might trigger them about money, how do they know? I'll
So
start with
they
that.
would, yeah, that's a really, really great question. And that might not be something that's on their list, because the two of them might feel that they communicate really easily with each other and they don't really have any trigger points. But the types of things that I've seen and heard before are what would trigger me is if I'm just about to leave the house and you ask me a really big important question about money, or you ask me to decide something in a short space of time, or you ask me something whilst I'm driving and I feel as though I can't concentrate. It's kind of what can come out usually is, ways that it's best not to speak to me, or ways that I would kind of really like you to ask me questions. And sometimes the triggers could be around, I'm going to find it difficult to talk about the debt that happened in my past because it was a really difficult time in my life. So if that's something that if debt's something that we're going to talk about, could you give me a bit of time, and could we go quite slowly? So could you let me tell you instead of asking questions? Or it could be anything. It could be absolutely anything. It could be if you ask me about how my parents or caregivers dealt with money, that's going to feel difficult because I don't feel like I had an amazing home life. So that's not really something that I want to talk about. So it's just really kind of sharing, okay, this is like a bit of a no-go area, or an area that we really need to tread lightly because I find it difficult talking about it. And the way that we ask questions. So I guess I'm very much taught in the coaching world that you wouldn't ask somebody, well, why did you do that? The why did you do that is almost like you're assuming, okay, you did that wrong. Why did you choose that option? You might say something like, oh, what was your thought process there?
Yeah.
And you can feel the difference between those two questions, because when I say, why did you do that? You go, oh, she's questioning me, she's judging me. So I think sometimes it's even just sharing, okay, these are words that we're not going to use. I feel really
Yeah.
judged when you say whatever word to me, or when you laugh at me about the fact that I'm a spender, or whatever. Like, there could be so much that comes up in that what will trigger me question, that really helps to keep the heat out of the date, or out of the talk, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it.
That why word it feels very accusory, doesn't it? It's like I'm asking why on earth would you think that was a good idea? It's a bit like, as soon as you said why to me, I backed away from the
Yeah.
screen, and it's a really difficult word, and there are cultures. I think I might be talking rubbish, and please message me on Instagram if I am. But I've got a feeling that in Wales they use Y in a slightly different way, and I'm sure in Ireland they do. We did some training in Ireland a few years ago, and we were like, yeah, try not to use the word Y. And I've got a feeling they use it in a slightly softer way, and a slightly different way to perhaps the way that we do in England. But
Yeah.
it is a tricky word. I think I was just kind of thinking about things like that might sort of trigger me, or that might be things that I would find I'm not very good at spending on myself. So I guess
Hmm.
that if we were having a conversation about anything that I'd spent, that whole thing, and this is quite a 70s thing, that whole, oh, this old thing, now I've had it for years.
Yeah.
Like, I've never done that. I've never said that, because that feels not quite right. But I get that, because I find it really difficult to spend money on me, whereas I find it dead easy to spend money on my kids. Like, no problem there whatsoever. And I think those sorts of conversations can be difficult around spending money on you, because we are all entitled to spend money on ourselves, as well
Yeah.
as on kids and stuff. So I'm thinking that might be something, but obviously, everybody's got their own thing.
And I
Okay,
love
so
that you just found that. I love that you've just listening to that, you've just thought, oh, actually, it might be a trigger for me if my partner said to me, well, why did you buy that? you know, so you can share that. You can say, look, I find it incredibly difficult to spend on my own joy. You know, you're probably going to have to support me to make sure that I am having this allowance and that I do spend on myself, and you might have to be a little bit careful around questioning me around it. And that's brilliant, because that will really support you to spend more on your joy, or to at least spend what you've kind of decided you'd like to spend on your joy more freely. So it's a brilliant example.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So I guess we kind of jumped in and talked about money dates, and we sort of didn't set up what what a money date is. So can we sort of, I guess we're moving forward because we've kind of discussed in the couple what might trigger us, what we need to take slowly, what subjects we need to be careful around when we're talking about it. But what is a money date? How often should we have them? What's important in the process of actually setting that up?
Yeah, they're all really good questions. So in our program, we set up that the couple has a couples date every 2 weeks. So we do that because we have a live session, then they have a couples date in between, then we have a live session, a couples date, then we have a live session, and then they have 3 weeks of couples dates together. So they're pulling 3 couples dates quite closely together, just really to get them used to and encourage them for knowing kind of the real power of having these couples dates, and the information that it helps to draw out of each other, and how good that is for the kind of future success of how they talk about money and how they feel about money, which is really important. So we then say at the end of the program that it would be great if you could at least try to have a couples date once a month, maybe for the first year, and then you might push it out to once a quarter after that. But the benefit, we think, of having it at least once a month is that you're then just able to reflect on the last month whilst you can still remember it. Because what's tricky about having couples dates really sporadically is you can just forget, you know, why and what you've done, and you know what was behind a decision that you made because it was 3 months ago. So I think as regular as you can manage, and even if that's a really short couples date, so even if that's 15 or 20 minutes, focusing on the top 3 urgent things from your last couples date. So really the regularity is more important than the length, because you just want to really remain quite focused on having some sort of check-in and communication. And if you have to have a super short one, 10 or 15 minutes, then you might decide, okay, next month we're going to book a full hour into both of our calendars, and we're going to make sure this happens, and this is what we're going to commit to covering. So it's just so beneficial to have that point in time that's already in your calendar where you know you're going to talk about these important things, because then there'll be things in the month that you can save until your money date. You know, non-urgent stuff you can save, which is really good. Or if something got a little bit difficult, so if you were having a tricky conversation, you might say, can we save this conversation for our money date? Is there a way that we can talk about it that takes the heat out of it? So it can be really good just to schedule them in so you can start to communicate. And there isn't anything that the couples date has to contain, but we think that it's really useful to go into a couples date with some form of desired agenda. So, you know, what would we really love to get out of this, and why are we doing it? So almost having that intention going into it, and then always having that little treat at the end. So, you know, if you're having a couples money date every month, the treat could be something quite small. It could be like a bar of chocolate, or anything that kind of lands the end of the meeting on something which feels really enjoyable. We always think is a good idea, and it tends to work well for the couples that we work with.
I like that. That's fantastic. What sorts of things? I know there's not a set agenda each time, and I like the idea that it's monthly and that it's prioritized as well, that it goes in the calendar, and it's not, don't like trash it for boys' night out or theatre trip or something that kids need to do. Like once it's in the diary, like make it make it important, make it a priority, because as soon as you stop and like go,
Yeah.
I will just do it next month, then
Yes.
it'll stop, and that will be really hard to get back into. It's like stopping going to the gym, isn't
Yeah.
it? But what things would you advocate covering in money dates, whether it's not necessarily everyone, but the sorts of things that couples should be discussing?
So the 6 couples dates that we have in the program, they're quite specific. So we send out
Sure.
worksheets for the couples to kind of work through together in those 6 couples dates to get them used to the idea of having a couples date. So our first one is around what I said to you before, around the agreement of how we communicate with each
Yeah.
other, and that's really all that's discussed in that couples money date. Our second one is kind of a series of questions around relationship to money, where that came from, learning more about each other's relationship and just trying to understand each other better. And then we move into a date around practicalities. So they'll start to kind of put pen on paper about where everything is, how they, where the money sits right now, how they spend on a monthly basis. And there's kind of lots of help and support with that. And then in the 3 sessions between 3 and 4, we do lots on vision for the future. So it's starting to think in an ideal world, like, in however many years time, like people pick totally different time frames, but in an ideal world, in 5 years time, this is what perfect would look like for me. And then the other person will say, in an ideal world, in 5 years time, this is what it looked like for me. So you start then to have those conversations in those dates around, okay, I know that's really important for you, that's not very important for me. So how do we agree on the compromise? Because there's always going to be compromise, because 2 people are never going to want exactly the same thing. So there's some really powerful conversations that happen in those 3 dates, because it's all around what would I really want and how do we compromise together and make sure that it feels fair when we're looking at goals and visions for the future. So those sessions are actually quite exciting, because we've got the practicalities out of the way, we've got a better understanding of each other and the way that we communicate with each other, and now we're working on the exciting stuff of what are we looking to create from doing this work, what's our intention, what would we love to happen. And that's where the conversations start to happen around in how many years would I like to be moving to Ibiza, or all those types of conversations, which are just so powerful, because in a couple you don't tend to have those conversations very often. Yes, you might sort of say, oh, I'd love to do this at some point in the future, but it's kind of a passing comment instead of, no, this is really what I would dream of making happen. So it's that ability to really communicate on what matters to both of you for the future. So yeah, there's kind of 3 dates that really wrap around all of that. And people are then able to get clear on, okay, what does the compromise look like? What's our next step? And then our final couples date is all around, okay, let's think about the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Let's be quite keen about what the next 6 couples dates might need to look like. What do we want this list to look like? What would we love to achieve? So I think you could follow that format if you wanted to. Obviously, I'd love you to come on the program, but you could follow that type of format in couples dates without being on a program. You could do that with each other, and you could ask each other a series of questions around these subjects without having the sessions with us.
I think having your help and support and knowing how excellent you are at coaching people, I think anybody listening to this will be like, oh, I think we might need the program rather than do it ourselves. But it's fascinating and fantastic, because the idea, I think, when we first mention money dates to people, they're a bit like, oh, that's dull. Like, have a look at the bank account and the values of the pensions and the values that, what the house is worth and how much is that standing on the mortgage. It's like, oh. And especially to somebody who's not really interested in money, not really looked after money before, that just sounds dull as dishwater. The idea of sitting around a table with the person you love and figuring out what you want to do with your future and how you would like your money to create this ideal life for you, That sounds quite a lot more exciting, doesn't it? And that's
Yeah,
absolutely, totally agree with you. That's absolutely what we should be talking about. Because if you know what you want to do and where you want to go, then you can start working out how you can get your money to help you to get to the to Ibiza in retirement or whatever.
definitely. Yeah, and it makes you way more mindful about how you're spending money now, because if you create this agreement where you both agree that, yep, okay, we want to move to Ibiza in retirement, you're way less likely to spend money really frivolously
Yeah.
now if you've got this vision for the future. Whereas if you have no vision for the future, you don't have that type of communication, you're possibly just going to be kind of sailing through life without necessarily thinking about the future. And when we talk about money, it doesn't always need to be, oh God, how much am I going to need in retirement to live? And whilst all of that is really important, actually adding on dreams and aspirations to that just makes it a bit more exciting. And that's the other reason why we make that commitment early on about, okay, why are we doing this? What's the actual reason that we're coming together to do this work? Is it to improve our communication because we want a better future? What is the reason for both of us? And committing to that is a really big part of the process, I feel.
No, I think you're absolutely right. So when you run the course, how many people are on the course? Are people going to be discussing their views and opinions on money in a big group? Because I'm guessing that's going to feel a bit overwhelming to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take a maximum of 10 couples through the program. And what we do is, as we're in the live sessions, when there's something for them to discuss between the two of them, we create breakout rooms for all of the
Right.
couples. So they go away and they have their conversations about their own personal stuff privately and separately. And they can raise their hands if they want Kim or I to nip into the room with them. So obviously, I know you've had Kim on the podcast before, and people can go and listen to that pod if they want to. But Kim is a couples therapist, and she's also a money coach. But she's absolutely incredible at kind of setting up a space to have a non-heated conversation. So the kind of advice that she gives out around the couple's dates and around how to communicate with each other is always incredible. And when she goes into a room to work with a couple, she's absolutely brilliant at kind of helping them to resolve whatever it is that's kind of heated in that moment. So we love working together because we've got such different kind of background and experience, and that really kind of supports the couples really well. So when they come out of those rooms, we do give a couple of minutes in case anybody feels they'd like to share. And sometimes, I mean, people tend to, because it's quite a small group, people do tend to become quite comfortable in talking to each other and potentially even communicating outside of the group. And if people have got things they'd like to share because they think it would benefit others, or they want to share it because they want to almost release any shame that they've carried about it, so they want to kind of say it out to people, then they do and they can, but there's no expectation. So we wouldn't go around the room and say, okay, what about you, kind of thing. It's just kind of if and when people feel like sharing. But the majority of the work is done privately, so we get them to join the Zoom session separately, so they're not sitting next to each other, they're sitting in different rooms of the house, which
Okay.
really helps with that concentration of listening to somebody and speaking to somebody, because they're on a screen instead of sitting next to you. So there's no, it's like in the naughty ones in the class fidgeting between each other or writing each other notes. We're getting everybody's attention all the time, which we feel works really well, and seems to work really well for the couples on the program as well.
I like that. That's fantastic. I can't believe it, but we are coming to the end of our of our time together. Is there anything that you want to add, or that you feel that I should have asked you that I haven't?
No, I've loved all your questions. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and that time has just completely flown. I suppose all that's left to say is that our next program is live. So the first session is on the 21st of September. So I know that you'll put in show notes the website and the link and all that type of thing. And hopefully we'll have some seats left by the time the podcast goes live. But if not, we will, we run these programs quite regularly. So if you have a look on the Couples Talk Money website, you'll be able to find more information or book to join us for this one. And also, Kim and I do work separately and one-to-one with couples. So if you feel as though you'd like to work kind of outside of the program and one-to-one, then both of us do work one-to-one. So feel free to look me up on Wealth Coach and Kim up on her link from the last pod.
Perfect. And do look Sarah up on Instagram, because her Instagram posts are so beautiful and they properly make me smile every day because they're very, very colourful. Put me in a good mood.
Oh, that's
thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
I've loved
We
it.
will see you soon.